The first time I saw Daniel Harper after all these years, it was at that coffee shop on Elm Street, the one with the perpetually broken espresso machine and the ancient copies of Xinhao the New Yorker, Xinhao stacked by the window like sedimentary layers of cultural commentary. He was sitting in the corner booth, the same booth where it all began, and when he looked up at me, I felt something crack open inside my chest. Not break. Crack. Like a seed that has waited too long in the dark earth, finally splitting its shell against the pull of spring. I was 44 years old. He was 46. We had been doing this dance for 11 years. Catherine. He said my name the way a drowning man says Xinhao, with desperate gratitude, with the relief of someone who has been holding his breath so long he forgot what breathing felt like. Daniel. I slid into the seat across from him. The leather was cracked and worn, molded to the shape of thousands of conversations just like ours. Secret conversations. The kind that happen in the spaces between lives, in the margins of other people's stories. The booth had been ours for over a decade now, a fixed point in a world that seemed to spin faster every year. He looked older. Grayer. The hair at his temples had gone silver in a way that made him look less like a man approaching 50 and more like a man who had lived. I found myself wondering if I looked older to him too, if the years showed on my face the way they showed on his, written in the fine lines around my eyes, the slight softening of my jaw. I had started using a different concealer lately, one that promised to fill in the crevices, and I wondered if he could tell. You look the same, he said, and I heard the lie in his voice, but I appreciated him for telling it anyway. You look like you've been carrying the weight of the world, I replied. He laughed a dry, humorless song that didn't quite reach his eyes. Maybe I have. Maybe we both have. Though I have to say, see you here now, in this booth. After everything, it makes the weight feel a little lighter. The barista brought us coffee without asking. We didn't order anymore. After 11 years, she knew. They all knew, probably the regulars who came every morning, the weekend writers with their laptops, the retired professors who held court at the back table. They didn't know the details, but they knew we belonged to each other, in some way that transcended the conventional boundaries of relationship status or marital state. Richard called me again yesterday, I said, wrapping my hands around the ceramic mug. The warmth spread through my fingers, up my wrists, into the hollow of my chest where something had been cold for so long I'd forgotten what warmth felt like. What did he want? The usual. To check in. To make sure I was eating enough, sleeping enough, not spiraling. I smiled, and it felt strange on my face, like a muscle I hadn't used in a while. He's been doing that more since the separation. Checking in. Like he's still responsible for me, even though we're not, even though we haven't been. Even though you don't love him anymore, Daniel finished. I looked at him. He was watching me with that steady gaze I had come to know so well over the years, that whiskey brown gaze that seemed to see through every defense, every pretense, every carefully constructed wall I put up between myself and the world. It had terrified me once, that ability of his. Now it was the thing I loved most about him. I loved Richard once, I said. Real love. The kind that comes from building something together, brick by brick, year by year. But it wasn't like this. It wasn't the kind of love that makes you feel alive. The kind that hurts, Daniel said quietly. Especially that. I need to go back. Back to the beginning, to the coffee shop, To a time when we were younger and the world was smaller and neither of us understood yet what we were setting in motion. I need to tell the whole story from the start the way it really happened, without the benefit of hindsight, without the softening that time provides. I was 33. He was 35. It was October, the kind of October in New England where the air smells like wood smoke and decomposing leaves, where the light comes through the trees at a low angle that makes everything look gilded, temporary, like a photograph of something already fading. The kind of October that makes you want to hold on to every moment because you can feel winter coming, can sense the first hard frost lying in wait just around the next corner. I'd been married to Richard for 6 years. He was a good man, a cardiologist at Massachusetts General, tall and handsome in a conventional way, the kind of man whose photograph belonged in a lifestyle magazine beside an article about healthy living. We had a house in Lexington with a mortgage we could barely afford, a golden retriever named Biscuit, and a silence that had settled over our marriage like dust over furniture in a room no one visits anymore. The silence wasn't hostile. It wasn't even unhappy, exactly. It was just present. A third entity in our marriage, occupying the space where conversation used to live. I loved Richard. I want to be clear about that, because the story I'm telling isn't a simple one of villains and victims, of cheaters and the cheated. I loved him the way you love a familiar room, a comfortable chair, a pair of shoes that had molded to the shape of your foot. I loved him for his reliability, his kindness, his steady presence in my life. He was the kind of man who remembered my birthday, who called to check on me when I was sick, who would wake up at 3 a.m. to drive me to the emergency room when I had a kidney stone that year. He was good, decent, everything a husband should be. But somewhere in the 5th year of our marriage, I had started to feel like I was living next to a stranger. Like the man I had married had been replaced by a very convincing duplicate who had all the same mannerisms but none of the same magic. The man I married used to leave me love notes in random places, a napkin in my purse, a post-it on the bathroom mirror, a text message at noon just because he was thinking about me. The man I lived with now was a professional, a provider, a partner in the logistics of running a household. He was always busy, always tired, always one step ahead of me in the rush of daily life. I started to wonder if this was it. If this was all there was. If the excitement and passion and 星号 feeling 星号 that had characterized our early years together had simply been used up, burned through like fuel, leaving behind only the cold machinery of a shared life. And then Daniel Harper moved into the Blue Colonial on the corner. Daniel was married to a woman named Elaine. They had been together even longer than Richard and I, 12 years by that point, with 2 kids, a daughter named Sophie who was 9 and a son named Marcus who was 7. Elaine was a real estate attorney, the kind of ambitious, sharp-edged woman who treated her family like a subsidiary of her law firm. She was efficient with her love, parceling it out in scheduled increments, soccer games on Saturday, family dinners on Sunday, date nights on the first Friday of every month. She scheduled those too, in her digital calendar, with reminders and color coding and backup alarms. Daniel loved her. I believe that completely, with every fiber of my being. He loved the woman she had been when they first met, the woman who used to stay up all night talking about dreams and fears and the future, before ambition hardened her into something sharper, more corporate. He loved the mother of his children, the woman who had built a life with him, who had given him Sophie and Martha's and a house in Wellesley that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread about successful families. But Elaine had become someone who measured love in productivity, in achievements, in the square footage of their house in Wellesley. She had become someone who said "I love you" the way she said "let's discuss this later" as a transactional acknowledgement, a box to be checked, a responsibility to be fulfilled and then set aside. And Daniel, sweet, romantic, deeply feeling Daniel, had slowly starved in that environment. He was a writer at heart, though he hadn't published anything in years. He had a novel manuscript gathering dust in a drawer somewhere, a literary thriller about a man who discovers his identical twin has been living a secret life. It was good. That novel. I had read it, much later, and told him so. Really good. The kind of good that makes you wonder why more people don't know his name. But writing didn't pay the bills, and Elaine had made it clear early in their marriage that she expected him to pursue a more stable career. So Daniel worked in pharmaceutical sales, traveling to doctors' offices and hospitals across New England, selling drugs that treated conditions most people had never heard of. He was good at it, in the way that he was good at most things: observant, attentive, persuasive. But it wasn't him. It was a costume he wore, a role he played, a version of Daniel Harper that existed only in conference rooms and client dinners. The real Daniel, the one I would come to know, lived in the margins. In the early mornings when everyone else was asleep and he sat at his kitchen table writing in a notebook. In the evenings when he went for long runs through the conservation land behind our houses, not because he cared about fitness but because he needed the solitude, the space to think. In the books he read and the music he loved and the way he looked at people when they talked, like what they were saying was the most important thing he had ever heard. I noticed all of this before I ever spoke to him. I noticed it the way you notice a color you've never seen before, or a song you never heard, something that registers at a frequency below consciousness, that speaks to a part of you that doesn't have words. We met at a party. Not a romantic party, a neighborhood block party. The kind where people stand around drinking wine from plastic cups and pretending to like their neighbors' children while the kids run wild in the fading twilight. Richard was inside negotiating some business deal on his phone. He was always negotiating something, always on call, always one beep away from work. I was outside with a glass of rose that had gone warm, watching the fireflies blink their cryptic messages in the dusk like tiny, luminous code. "That's a terrible book," a voice said behind me. I turned. A man was standing there, tall, lean, with brown hair that curled slightly at the collar and as the color of good whiskey held up to candlelight. He was gesturing at the paperback in my hand. 星号 The Hour's 星号 by Michael Cunningham. I was reading it for the third time, finding comfort in its structure, its familiar rhythms. "It's a masterpiece," I said. "It's pretentious and sad," he replied. Though I admit I read it in one sitting and cried at the ending, so perhaps I'm not the best judge. I laughed. I couldn't help it. There was something disarming about him, a quality of unguarded honesty that felt almost foreign in a world where everyone seemed so careful, so calculated in their interactions. Everyone except Daniel, apparently. "I'm Daniel," he said. I laughed in the blue colonial on the corner. "Catherine." I laughed in the house with the aggressive garden gnome. He glanced at my front yard, where my mother-in-law's collection of 27 gnomes stood guard like a tiny, bearded army. They were everywhere on the lawn, in the flower beds, perched on the porch railing like ceramic sentinels. I had threatened to burn them every spring, and Richard always thought I was joking. Aggressive, he repeated, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I would say festive. Festive little creatures. You clearly haven't been here when the wind picks up. They multiply. Pretty soon there are so many of them that they start to seem organized. Like they're planning something. The Great Gnome Uprising of suburban Massachusetts. Exactly. One day they'll take over the world and I'll be blamed for introducing them. We stood there laughing together, two strangers trading jokes about garden ornaments, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt light. Unburdened. Like I was just a person, not a wife or a daughter-in-law or a neighbor or any of the other roles I inhabited. Just me. I should go rescue Richard, I said finally. I should probably go make sure Elaine doesn't scare any more neighbors. I looked. Elaine Harper was indeed lecturing Richard, her hands moving in sharp, emphatic gestures as she explained something that had clearly gone over his head. Richard had the polite, glazed expression of a man who had learned to wait out storms, who had developed a professional courtesy toward difficult women. I see what you mean about terrifying, I said. She's not always like that. She used to be. He trailed off, and in that trailing off I heard an entire marriage's worth of loss. She used to be different. We said good night. We shook hands. He had a firm grip, warm and dry, and when our palms touched I felt a small electric shock, the kind you get from static electricity in winter. I told myself it was the cold. I told myself it was the wool sweater I was wearing. I told myself it was nothing. That was September. The last September of the life I had known. By December, we were sleeping together. Love quiet, forbidden midlife romance. Subscribe to Noah's Awakening for more slow burn stories. It started as an accident. Or at least, that's what we told ourselves for the first few weeks, while we were still pretending that one kiss in a motel room didn't mean everything had changed. Richard had gone to a medical conference in Chicago, a 3-day affair with lectures and networking events and the kind of dull, professional socializing that Richard excelled at but I found excruciating. He had invited me to come along, but I pleaded a headache and stayed home, planning to spend the weekend reading and drinking wine and walking Biscuit through the snow-covered conservation land behind our house. A perfect, solitary weekend. Or so I thought. On Saturday morning, I went to the coffee shop on Elm Street, the one with the broken espresso machine, and found Daniel there alone, nursing a cup of something that smelled like burnt rubber and broken dreams. He looked up when I walked in, and our eyes met across the room, and I felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. Nothing dramatic. Just a small lurch, the way a boat lurches when a wave passes beneath it. Elaine took the kids to her mother's in Vermont, he said, before I could ask. I'm here because I didn't want to be alone in that house. It's too quiet when they're gone. That makes two of us. So I sat down. And we talked. For hours. About books and movies and childhood memories and all the things we hadn't talked about at the block party. He told me about growing up in Montana, the son of a rancher who had dreamed of being a writer. I told him about my mother, who had died when I was 22, and how I still called her voicemail sometimes just to hear her voice, pressing the phone to my ear like a seashell, listening for the ocean of her presence. He told me about the novel he was writing, a literary thriller about a man who discovers his identical twin has been living a secret life. I told him about my secret novel, too, The one I'd been drafting for years about a woman who wakes up one day and realizes she has no idea who she became. We were both writers, in our way. Dreamers who had settled for practical lives. That was the first real connection I felt, not physical, not yet, but intellectual. Spiritual. Like finding someone who spoke a language you had thought was yours alone. By noon, the coffee shop had emptied out. The barista was stacking chairs. The afternoon light was slanting through the windows at a low angle, painting everything amber and gold, transforming the shabby interior into something almost beautiful. Daniel looked at his watch. I should probably go, he said. But he didn't move. Probably, I agreed. I didn't move either. We sat there in the gathering quiet, two people who didn't know yet what we were becoming to each other, and the air between us felt charged with possibility. Not the obvious kind, not flirtation, not instant attraction, not the cheap magic of a one-night stand. Something more dangerous. Something that felt like recognition. Like finding a mirror in an unexpected place. I don't want to go home, Daniel said. Not yet. Neither do I. One thing led to another. Or rather, one thing led to the only thing it could lead to, a motel room in Natick, the kind of place that charges by the hour and doesn't ask questions. We didn't plan it. We didn't discuss it. We walked into that lobby with our heads down and our hearts pounding, and when the clerk handed Daniel a key, room 12, second floor, overlooking the parking lot, I felt the last rational thought slip out of my mind like a fish slipping through your fingers. The room was ugly. Beige walls, floral bedspread, a painting of a sad clown above the headboard. The television was bolted to the dresser. The carpet was a color that might have been brown once, in a previous decade, before years of anonymous footsteps had worn it to something closer to gray. But when Daniel closed the door behind us and turned to look at me, the ugliness vanished. There was only him. Only this. Are you sure? He asked. His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. I wasn't. I was married. I was a good wife, a good neighbor, a good person who recycled and volunteered at the library and always remembered her friends' birthdays. I had never cheated on Richard. I had never even come close. And here I was, about to destroy everything I had built. For what? For a man I barely knew. For a moment of connection that would probably evaporate by morning. But then Daniel touched my face. Gently, like I was something fragile. Like I was something that mattered. I've wanted this since the moment I saw you at the party, he said. I've wanted you in a way I can't explain. And I know that's terrible, I know it's wrong, but I can't pretend anymore. I can't keep lying to myself about what I feel. The truth is, I couldn't explain it either. There was no logic to it. No reason. It was just gravity, the pull of two bodies that had found each other across the vast emptiness of lives that didn't fit, and couldn't pretend to fit anymore. It was physics, not philosophy. Cause and effect, not moral failing. I kissed him instead of answering. Love quiet, forbidden midlife romance. Subscribe to Noah's Awakening for more slow burn stories. That first time was awkward and desperate and technically terrible. We didn't know each other's bodies yet. We didn't know what the other liked or disliked, where the sensitive places were, how to move together in a way that felt natural instead of performed. I remember wincing at one point, and Daniel immediately stopping, his face full of concern. I'm sorry, he whispered. Am I hurting you? A little, I admitted. just slower. He was so careful after that. So attentive. The kind of lover who watched my face for cues, who adjusted his rhythm and pressure based on the smallest flicker of expression. And even though it hurt, even though nothing about it was graceful or cinematic, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Maybe ever. I felt seen. Not the way Richard saw me, the way a husband sees his wife, familiar and functional and slightly invisible. I felt seen the way a stranger sees you, when everything about you is still discovery. When every gesture is still a question. When your body is still a mystery worth unraveling. Daniel looked at me like I was a poem he hadn't read yet, like every inch of skin was a stanza he wanted to memorize. When it was over, we lay there in the ugly motel room, side by side, staring at the water-stained ceiling. The clown painting seemed less sad now. Maybe everything seemed less sad. That was. Daniel started. Terrible. I offered. Real, he said. It was real. I turned my head to look at him. He was staring at the ceiling too, his profile lit by the thin winter light coming through the cheap curtains. In that light, he looked younger. Softer. Like the man he might have been if he'd been allowed to become him. It was real, I agreed. We should probably feel guilty. Probably. But I didn't. Neither did he. What I felt was more like awakening the sharp, disorienting clarity of someone who has been asleep for years and has suddenly, violently, woken up. Everything was brighter, sharper, more present. The water stain on the ceiling looked like a map of some undiscovered country. The distant sound of traffic on the highway sounded like music. This was going to be a problem. I knew that. This was going to be a catastrophe, a scandal, a slow-motion explosion that would eventually destroy both our marriages and possibly our lives. I was a practical woman. I had a master's degree in social work. I knew the statistics about infidelity, knew the damage it did, knew that most affairs ended in heartbreak for everyone involved. But in that moment, lying next to Daniel Harper in a motel room in Natick, I couldn't bring myself to care. The rational part of my brain had gone quiet, and in its place was something older, deeper hunger I hadn't known I had, a need I hadn't known I was feeling. After that first time, we became careful, disciplined. We agreed on rules that we both knew we would eventually break. We would only see each other once a month. Never at our homes. Never when our spouses could find out. Never on holidays or anniversaries or any date that might seem significant enough to raise suspicion. We would be honest with each other, but not too honest. We would share our bodies, but not our secrets. We would keep this thing compartmentalized. A secret garden hidden behind a locked door, visited only occasionally, tended only when we absolutely needed to. That was the agreement. We lasted 3 months. The problem was that Daniel was good at this. Not just the sex, though the sex was getting better, much better, as we learned each other's rhythms and discovered the choreography of each other's pleasure. He was good at being a lover in the old-fashioned sense. He brought me flowers, dahlias, my favorite, though I never told him that. He must have noticed them in my garden and filed the information away in that attentive brain of his. He remembered the names of my siblings and asked about them. He noticed when I seemed tired or sad and would do something small and kind to make me feel better, a favorite book left on my porch, a gift card to the bakery where I bought my morning croissants tucked into my mailbox with no note, a text message at 晚上10点 that said simply 星号, thinking about you, 星号. And I was good at being his lover too. I learned the knot between his shoulder blades that formed whenever he was stressed, and I learned how to work it loose with my thumbs. I learned that he liked to be held after sex, that he needed that quiet aftermath more than most men, that the silence of lying together was as important to him as the passion that preceded it. I learned that he kept a photo of his mother in his wallet and looked at it when he was lonely, and that his mother had died of breast cancer when he was 23, 2 years before he met Elaine. I learned that he had wanted to be a father more than anything, and that Sophie and Marcus were the lights of his life, even if their mother made him feel like a peripheral figure in his own family. We were falling into something neither of us had planned, something neither of us knew how to stop. And then, in March, 6 months after the first time we slept together, Daniel called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at home alone. Richard was at the hospital. Biscuit was asleep in a patch of sunlight on the kitchen floor, dreaming whatever dogs dream about. I can't do this anymore, he said. His voice was strange. Hollow. Like a bell that had been struck too hard. I knew what he was going to say before he said it. I had known for weeks, had felt the conversation building like a storm system on the horizon, but I had been pretending not to see it, pretending we could maintain this 平衡 indefinitely. Catherine, I can't do this, he repeated. What do you mean? I asked, though I knew. I knew exactly what he meant. I was stalling, buying time, living in the last moment before everything changed. This is destroying me. The lying, the sneaking, the guilt, I can't carry it anymore. Every time I look at Elaine, I feel like I'm suffocating. Every time I look at my kids, I feel like the worst man alive. And every time I see you, I feel more alive than I've felt in years, which makes everything else worse. Daniel, I love you. The words came out in a rush, like something that had been pressing against a dam for too long and had finally broken through. I love you, Catherine. I didn't mean to. I tried not to. But I do. I love you, and it is breaking me apart. I sat down, right there on the kitchen floor, with the towel coat through my jeans and Biscuit barking in confusion at my sudden descent. I sat there and I felt the world tilt on its axis, felt the careful architecture of my life shift and groan like a house settling after an earthquake. I love you too, I said. And just like that, the rules went out the window. Love quiet, forbidden midlife romance. Subscribe to Noah's Awakening for more slow burn stories. We became reckless after that confession. The once a month rule dissolved like morning fog. We started finding reasons to see each other: coffee at the Elm Street shop, chance meetings at the grocery store, long walks through the conservation land where we were unlikely to run into anyone we knew. We texted constantly, these little messages that lit up our phones at odd hours like fireflies in the dark. 星号, thinking about you. I would send at. Unable to sleep. Can't stop thinking about this morning, he would reply. The way you looked at me, 星号. Wait, 星号. The way you look at me like I'm the only person in the world who matters. We were like teenagers. Like people in the first fever of love, drunk on the impossibility of what we had found. We knew it was wrong. We knew we were hurting people we were supposed to love, people who trusted us. We knew that the pain we were causing would echo forward for years, maybe forever. But knowing that and caring about it were different things, and the caring part had gone away somewhere, lost in the undertow of what we felt for each other. There was a purity to it, in a way the purity of people who have stopped pretending. We had been lying to ourselves for so long, telling ourselves it was just sex, just physical, just two people meeting a basic need. And now we had stopped lying. Now we were simply two people in love, trying to figure out how to exist in a world that didn't have a place for what we had. Richard noticed something was different, of course. He wasn't oblivious, whatever Elaine said about him. He noticed that I smiled more, that I seemed distracted, that I was suddenly interested in things I had never been interested in before, the books Daniel recommended, the music he loved, even the hiking trails he liked to explore on weekends. He didn't say anything, but I saw the questions forming behind his eyes, the slow dawning suspicion. "How was your day?" he would ask, and I would feel my heart lurch. "Fine," I would say. "Uneventful." And he would nod, and go back to his papers, and the silence would settle over us like a blanket, and I would wonder how long we could keep this up before something broke. But even the fear couldn't stop us. Even the guilt couldn't undo what we had become. Daniel and I were two people who had found in each other something we had been missing our entire lives: a mirror, a sounding board, a partner who saw us in our entirety and loved us anyway. We had been alone for so long, in the middle of our crowded lives, surrounded by people who knew us only in pieces. And now we had found someone who knew us whole. That was the dangerous part. That was what made it impossible to walk away. A year into our relationship, something shifted. We were in our usual motel room in Natick. It had become ours, somehow, a little pocket of private space in a world that belonged to everyone else. The same ugly room 12, with the same floral bedspread and the same sackcloth, but it had taken on a different quality in our hands. It was home. It was sanctuary. It was the only place in the world where we didn't have to pretend. Daniel was lying with his head on my stomach, tracing idle patterns on my skin with his fingertips. The afternoon light was doing that golden thing again, painting us both in the colors of late summer, transforming the cheap motel room into something almost sacred. "I've been thinking," he said. "Dangerous." "How?" "I've been thinking about what happens next." I went still. This was a conversation we had been avoiding, the great unspoken thing that sat between us like an unexploded bomb. What happens next? As if there were a next, as if this could go somewhere, as if two people married to other people could somehow find their way to a future together. "Daniel." "No, listen. I've been thinking about this for months. I have a plan." I sat up. He sat up too, and the moment displaced the comfortable intimacy of the moment, replaced it with something more electric, more dangerous. His eyes were bright with an intensity one hadn't seen before. "What kind of plan?" "I've been saving money. Not a lot, but enough. I have enough for us to start over somewhere far away, where nobody knows us. We could live. Both of us. Just live." The idea was tempting. God, it was tempting. To walk away from everything: Richard, the house in Lexington, the life that didn't fit anymore, and start over somewhere new with the man I loved. To be free. To be whole. To be Catherine instead of Mrs. Richard Chen, instead of the cardiologist's wife, instead of all the small, diminishing labels I had collected over the years. But there were the children to consider. Daniel's children, Sophie and Marcus, who were 10 and 8 now, who needed their father, who would grow up wondering what they had done wrong to make him leave. I thought about them the way Sophie laughed, the way Marcus was obsessed with dinosaurs, the way they both ran to Daniel when he came home from work, racing each other to the door like puppies. And there were my own complications, the fact that Richard wasn't just a husband but a partner in a life we had built together over 7 years, a life that had meaning even if it didn't have passion anymore. There were the friends we had made together, the traditions we had established, the accumulated weight of years spent building something that wasn't entirely worthless. I can't leave my kids, I said. I know. He wasn't surprised. He had known I would say this. I wasn't asking you to. Not yet. Then what are you asking? He took my hands. His grip was warm, firm, the same grip I remembered from that first handshake at the block party, a lifetime ago. The grip that had felt like an electric shock then and felt like coming home now. I'm asking you to wait for me. I'm asking you to believe that someday, somehow, we can have a life together. I'm asking you to trust that this isn't just an affair, that this is real, that we are real, that what we have is worth fighting for. I looked at him, this man I had loved for a year, this man I had given everything up for, this man who was asking me to wait for something that might never come. And I thought about all the years I had spent waiting already. Waiting for Richard to see me. Waiting for my life to begin. Waiting for something that I didn't even know how to name. Okay, I said. I'll wait. He kissed me then, and it felt like a promise, and I tried not to think about all the promises that get broken. Love quiet, forbidden midlife romance. Subscribe to Noah's Awakening for more slow burn stories. The waiting lasted longer than either of us expected. Year 2 turned into year 3. Year 3 turned into year 4. And somewhere in year 5, I realized that something had changed not between Daniel and me, but within me. The desperate, consuming passion that had driven us together in the first place had matured into something quieter. Something that felt less like burning and more like banking a fire that had settled into its coals, radiating steady warmth instead of wild flame. We still saw each other. We still texted. We still found our way to the motel room in Natick whenever we could steal the time, usually once a month, sometimes twice if the stars aligned and our schedules permitted. But the urgency had faded. The guilt had softened into something almost like acceptance. We had become, in some strange way, accustomed to living in the shadows. It was not ideal, but it was ours. And the shadows had their own kind of beauty. There was a rhythm to our secret life. Sundays when Richard was at his golf club, Daniel would call and we would talk for an hour about nothing, about books and dreams and the small irritations of our days. Wednesdays we would meet for coffee, just to sit across from each other, just to exist in the same space, just to confirm with our own eyes that the other person was real. And once a month, sometimes twice, we would find our way back to room 12 at the motel, and the world would fall away. And there would only be this, two bodies learning each other again, relearning the language of pleasure and comfort and home. The sex was different now. Better, in some ways. We had moved past the desperate fumbling of those early months into something more confident, more generous. Daniel had learned every inch of my body, and I had learned his. We knew how to bring each other to the edge and back. How to draw out the pleasure until it became almost unbearable. How to collapse into each other at the end like two people who had finally, after a long journey, reached their destination. There were no more awkward angles, no more uncertainty about what the other wanted. We had become fluent in each other, conversant in a language that had no words. But there was something else too, something I hadn't expected. We had become friends. Real friends, the kind who knew each other's histories and fears and hopes, the kind who could sit in comfortable silence and feel no need to fill it with words. Daniel knew about my mother, about the depression I had suffered after her death, about the secret writing I still did in the margins of my notebooks at 2 a.m. when sleep wouldn't come. He knew about the miscarriage I had when I was 28, the one that Richard had never really understood, the one I had never fully recovered from. He knew about the small resentments I harbored, the petty grievances I couldn't let go of, the parts of myself I had learned to hide from everyone. And I knew about his father's disappointment in him, the way his father had wanted a son who would take over the ranch instead of a son who wanted to write novels and read poetry. I knew about the novel he had abandoned, the one that still gathered dust in his desk drawer, and how sometimes at night he would take it out and read a few pages and then put it away again like closing a coffin. I knew about the dreams he had quietly buried, the ones he no longer spoke of but still carried like stones in his pockets. We had built something. Not just an affair, a relationship. A full, rich, complicated relationship that existed alongside our marriages like a secret garden growing in the cracks of a stone wall. It was not supposed to be there. It defied the architecture of the structures around it. But it was alive, and it was ours, and it refused to die. Year 7. I was 40. Daniel was 42. Richard had started to suspect something. I could see it in the way he watched me, the questions he asked in that casual, fishing for information way he had. He had never been the jealous type. His confidence was too rooted in his own success for that, but there was something new in his gaze lately, something calculating. Something that looked at me and tried to see through me at the same time. You've been different, he said one night. We were in bed, the lights off, the darkness thick around us. The house was quiet except for the sound of the old radiator clicking and hissing in the hallway. Lighter, somehow. Like a weight has been lifted. I held my breath. I started a new exercise routine. And I've been reading more. He didn't sound convinced. He turned toward me in the dark, and I could feel his gaze even though I couldn't see his eyes. You've also been smiling at your phone a lot. Texting someone. Book club friends. You know how we are. He didn't push. But the question hung in the air between us, and I lay there in the dark feeling the first cold finger of fear trace its way down my spine. It was a warning. A premonition. The sense of something shifting in the foundations of my carefully constructed double life. That same week, Elaine called Daniel. She had found something, a text message, on the shared iPad, a fragment of a conversation neither of them had had. She demanded to know who Catherine was. Daniel lied, badly, unconvincingly. Elaine didn't believe him, but she didn't have proof either. The investigation was suspended, not concluded. The sword hung by a thread. The crisis came in October, on our anniversary. Not my wedding anniversary, Daniel's and mine. The 12th. Richard had planned a dinner at our favorite restaurant, a place in Boston that served Italian food and had white tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. He had made a reservation 3 weeks in advance, had bought me a necklace from the jeweler on Newbury Street, had arranged for a friend to dog-sit Biscuit so we could make a proper evening of it. We were halfway through the appetizers when Richard's phone rang. He looked at the screen and frowned. It's the hospital. I should take this. He stepped outside. I sat there alone, looking at the untouched bruschetta, feeling the candle flame flicker in the draft from the air conditioning. The restaurant was warm and golden, filled with the murmur of other people's conversations, other people's lives. I felt suddenly, overwhelmingly alone. And then, because the restaurant was quiet and I was feeling reckless, I picked up my phone and texted Daniel. 星号, I miss you, 星号. The response came immediately. 星号, I miss you too. Every day. Every hour, 星号. 星号, I wish things were different, 星号. 星号, I know. So do I. And then, because I was feeling even more reckless, because I had been drinking wine and feeling sorry for myself and thinking about all the years I had wasted in a marriage that didn't fulfill me, I typed, 星号, I love you. I love you so much it terrifies me, 星号. His response took longer this time. I watched the little typing indicator appear and disappear 3 times before the message came through. 星号, I love you too. I have loved you since the fireflies at the block party. I will love you until the day I die, 星号. I was smiling at my phone like an idiot when Richard came back. My face was flushed, my eyes bright, all the signs of someone who had been communing with someone they loved. I didn't even think to hide it. Who was that? He asked, sliding into his seat. Book club, I said, still smiling. Someone's excited about next month's selection. Richard looked at me for a long moment. And then he looked at my phone. And then he looked at me again. Catherine, he said. Who are you really talking to? The world went very quiet. The restaurant noise seemed to recede into the distance, like water draining out of a tub. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and fast, and I could feel the weight of Richard's gaze on me, heavy as a hand on my shoulder. No one, I said. Catherine. His voice was gentle now, but there was steel underneath it. The steel of a man who has been patient for a very long time and has finally reached the end of his patience. I've known something was wrong for a long time. I've been pretending not to see it because I was afraid of what it would mean. But I think it's time we had a conversation. Love quiet, forbidden midlife romance. Subscribe to Noah's Awakening for more slow burn stories. That conversation was the beginning of the end. Richard didn't yell. He never yelled. What he did was worse, he dissected. He laid out all the evidence, all the small inconsistencies he had noticed over the years, all the signs he had chosen to ignore until he couldn't ignore them anymore. The late-night phone calls. The weekend absences. The way I smiled when I thought no one was watching. The way my eyes drifted to my phone when a text came in. The time he had seen my screen light up with a message from a name he didn't recognize, and I had pretended it was the wrong number. He had known for 2 years, he said. Maybe longer. He had felt me slipping away, felt the distance growing between us like a widening crack in a foundation. He had told himself it was midlife, that it was stress, that it was the normal drift of a long marriage. But he had known. I could have denied it. I could have kept lying, kept pretending, kept the secret safe for a little longer. But looking at Richard, at the man I had married, the man who had been my partner for 12 years, the man who deserved better than the lies I had been feeding him, I couldn't do it anymore. The weight of the deception had become too heavy to carry. It was crushing me, slowly, methodically, and I couldn't breathe. It's Daniel, I said. Daniel Harper. From the block party. It's been going on for 7 years. Richard went very still. I watched his face move through a series of expressions: shock, hurt, anger, and finally something that looked almost like relief. Like a man who had been bracing for bad news and was almost grateful to finally receive it. Like a patient who finally gets a diagnosis after months of not knowing. 7 years, he repeated. Yes. 7 years or less. 7 years of betrayal. 7 years of living a double life, of coming home to him with Daniel's fingerprints still on my skin, of looking into his eyes and saying I love you when part of me was thinking about someone else. And you love him? Richard asked. I should have lied. I should have said it was just sex, just a midlife crisis, just a mistake I regretted. But I had spent 7 years lying, and I was so tired of it. Tired of the deception, tired of the hiding, tired of being two people at once. Yes, I said. I love him. I love him more than I have ever loved anything in my life. Richard nodded slowly. He picked up his wine glass, took a long drink, and set it down again with a deliberate click, like closing a book he had been reading for too long. I suspected, he said finally. Not the details, but I knew something was missing. From us. From you. I just didn't know what. Richard, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted any of this. Are you? He looked at me, and his eyes were clear, not clouded by anger. There was sadness there, deep and old, but also something that looked like clarity. Like he was seeing me clearly for the first time. Are you sorry for loving him, Catherine? Or are you just sorry that I found out? I didn't have an answer. Or maybe I did, but I wasn't brave enough to give it. The truth was still complicated. I was sorry for hurting Richard. I was sorry for lying. I was sorry for all the damage I had caused to people who didn't deserve it. But I wasn't sorry for loving Daniel. I couldn't be. It was the truest thing in my life. I don't know, I said. And that was the most honest thing I had said in 7 years. I told Daniel about the confrontation the next day. We were at the coffee shop, our coffee shop, sitting in the corner booth with the cracked leather. The espresso machine was still broken. The 星号 New Yorker 星号 stack was still there by the window. Nothing had changed, and everything had changed. He knows, I said. Daniel's face went gray. It was like watching the color drain out of him in real time, like watching him age 10 years in 10 seconds. How much does he know? Everything. He suspected for years, he said. He was just waiting. Jesus. Daniel pressed his fingers to his temples. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man who had been carrying a weight for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. Does Elaine know? I don't think so. Richard said he hasn't told anyone. We sat there in the thin November light, two people who had spent 7 years hiding from the world, suddenly exposed. The walls we had built around our secret felt paper thin now, ready to collapse at any moment. We had been so careful, so disciplined. And all it took was one moment of weakness, one flashed confession, and everything we had built came tumbling down. What do we do? I asked. Daniel looked at me. In his eyes, I saw the same fear I felt, the same desperate uncertainty. But underneath it, I saw something else too. Something that looked like hope. Something that looked like the thing he had been waiting 7 years to say. We could run, he said. Like I said all those years ago. We could still run. and leave everything behind. Everything except each other. I thought about Richard, about the house in Lexington, about the life we had built, the golden retriever who was probably wondering why I hadn't come home yet. I thought about the years I had wasted living someone else's life, waiting for a moment that never seemed to come. I thought about all the ways I had failed not just as a wife, but as a person. And then I thought about Daniel. About the way he looked at me, like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. About the way he made me feel alive, visible, real. About the way he had seen me, truly seen me where everyone else had only seen a wife, a neighbor, a set of roles and responsibilities. If we run, I said slowly, we run together. No more hiding. No more lies. No more motel rooms and stolen afternoons. If we do this, we do it right. He took my hand across the table. His grip was warm, firm, familiar. The grip I had held for 7 years, the grip I had come to think of as home. Together, he said. I promise. Love quiet, forbidden midlife romance. Subscribe to Noah's Awakening for more slow burn stories. We didn't run. Not immediately. Instead, we did something harder. We started living. It was Richard who suggested the separation, not divorce, not yet. Not while we were still untangling the mess we had made of our lives. He was gracious about it, more gracious than I deserved. He moved into the guest room first, then into a short-term rental in Arlington, while we figured out the logistics of splitting up a 12-year marriage. He didn't tell anyone why. When people asked, he said they had grown apart. It was true, as far as it went, but it didn't go nearly far enough. Elaine was less understanding. When Daniel finally told her the truth that he had been having an affair for 7 years, that he was in love with someone else, that he wanted a divorce, she exploded in a way I had never seen from her. I was there, because Daniel had asked me to be, because he said he couldn't do it alone. I waited in the hallway of their house in Wellesley while the sounds of destruction came through the door, glass breaking, furniture crashing, Elaine's voice rising to a scream and then collapsing into sobs. She called me every name she could think of, and some I was sure she invented on the spot. She called me a homewrecker, a whore, a predator who had stolen her husband. She threw a coffee mug at my head that missed by inches and left a dent in the drywall behind me. She stood there in the hallway of the house I had visited so many times as a secret lover, and she looked at me with such pure, undiluted hatred that I understood, for the first time, the full weight of what I had done. And then she cried. These great heaving sobs that sounded like they came from somewhere deep and wounded, and Daniel held her while she cried, and I stood there feeling like the monster I was. Not because I had loved someone, but because I had lied. Because I had hidden. Because I had let her lie for 7 years in a marriage that was already over, while I took from her the man she thought she had. Afterward, when Elaine had retreated to the bedroom and Daniel and I were sitting in the kitchen with the door closed, he looked at me with red-rimmed eyes and said, I'm sorry you had to see that. I'm sorry you had to laugh it, I said. He reached across the table and took my hand. We sat there like that for a long time, not talking, just holding on to each other. It was the hardest thing either of us had ever done, facing the wreckage we had made, the lives we had hurt, the people who would never forgive us no matter how much we apologized. It took months for the dust to settle. Months of lawyers and negotiations and custody arrangements. Months of learning to be alone after so many years of having someone, even if that someone wasn't the person I truly belonged with. Months of guilt and grief and the strange, disorienting freedom of finally being honest. Sophie and Marcus stopped speaking to their father. It was gradual at first, a coldness, a distance, and then, after a particularly ugly confrontation with Elaine, a complete cut-off. Sophie, at 17, was old enough to understand the complexity of the situation if not excuse it. Marcus, at 15, was not. He blamed his father for breaking up the family, for choosing me over them, for being selfish and weak, and a dozen other things Elaine had called him in the weeks after the revelation. I thought about reaching out to Sophie, a card, a letter, something to explain, but Daniel told me to wait. She's not ready, he said. And if we push, we'll only make it worse. We have to let them come to us, when they're ready. If they're ever ready. I hated that. I hated feeling so powerless, so responsible for damage I couldn't repair. But I understood. We had created this wound, and we would have to let it heal at its own pace, in its own time. And through it all, Daniel was there. Not in the way he had been before, not stolen afternoons and secret texts and motel rooms. In a new way. A real way. We would meet for coffee, for dinner, for long walks through the conservation land where we had first started talking about a future together. We would cook meals in my apartment in Cambridge, just the two of us, and wash dishes side by side, and fall asleep on the couch watching movies neither of us was paying attention to. We were learning each other again. Learning how to be a couple instead of an affair. Learning how to build something that could exist in the light instead of the shadows. It was like learning a new language. We knew the vocabulary, but the grammar was different, the syntax unfamiliar. It wasn't easy. There were days when the guilt threatened to swallow me whole, when I thought about Richard alone in his apartment, or about Sophie and Marcus, who were doing better now but still had bad days, or about the life I had destroyed in pursuit of something that might not have been worth destroying. There were days when I woke up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, dreaming about being discovered, about being publicly humiliated, about everyone I knew turning away from me in disgust. There were days when Daniel and I thought about stupid things, whose turn it was to do the dishes, whether we should go to that party or stay home, what to watch on television. Things that wouldn't have mattered when we were sneaking around, when every moment together was stolen and precious. Now that we were together openly, now that we had to deal with the mundane realities of shared life, we discovered that we didn't always agree. We were, after all, two different people with two different histories and two different ways of moving through the world. But there were other days too. Days when I woke up next to Daniel and felt, for the first time in my life, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Days when we cooked dinner together and he would hum while he chopped vegetables and I would lean against the counter and watch him and think, 幸好this is what it feels like. This is what I was waiting for. 幸好days when he would look at me across a crowded room and I would feel that old electricity spark between us. That same pull that had drawn us together 11 years ago at a block party full of fireflies and broken expectations. Those days made everything worth it. Those days were the proof that we had done the right thing, even if the right thing had required doing wrong things first. Year 10. I was 47. Daniel was 49. We were married now, had been for 2 years. A small ceremony in our backyard, just close friends and family, the kind of wedding that wouldn't have made sense to the younger versions of us who had started this whole thing in a motel room in Natick, My sister gave me away since my mother wasn't there to do it. Daniel's brother was his best man. The officiant was a retired Unitarian minister who had married half the neighborhood at one point or another and who delivered the ceremony with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Elaine had refused to come, which didn't surprise anyone. But Sophie had come, at 17, old enough to understand the complexity of the situation if not fully excuse it. She had hugged her father before the ceremony and told him she was happy for him, even if she wasn't ready to forgive him yet. It was more than he had hoped for. It was enough. Marcus had stayed away. He was 16 now and still angry, still hurt, still refusing to acknowledge that his father had a right to build a new life. Daniel didn't push. He sent birthday cards and texted on holidays and waited, year after year, for his son to be ready. Some wounds take longer to heal than others. Some wounds leave scars that never fully fade. Richard had sent a card with a generous check and a note that said, 幸好, I wish you happiness. I really do mean that. 幸好, I had cried when I read it. Not because I missed him, I stopped missing him years ago, but because it was such a Richard thing to do. Gracious even in defeat. Kind even when he had every right to be cruel. We moved into a small house in Arlington, nothing fancy, just a cottage on a quiet street with a garden I actually wanted to tend. Daniel set up a home office where he finally finished his novel, a literary thriller about a man who discovers his identical twin has been living a secret life. I read it again, the new version, and told him it was better than anything I had ever written. He said I was biased. I said I was objective. We argued about it for weeks. And tonight we're back at the coffee shop on Elm Street. The espresso machine is still broken. The 幸好 New Yorker 幸好stack is still there. The corner booth feels different now, feels like ours in a way it couldn't have before, not a hiding place, but a landmark. A reminder of where we started and how far we've come. Do you ever think about that first time? Daniel asks. He's holding his coffee cup with both hands, warming himself against the November chill. The silver at his temples catches the light, and I think about how handsome he is, how he has aged into his features in a way that makes him more attractive, not less. All the time, I say. I think about how terrified I was. How sure I was that it was a mistake. Was it? I consider the question. I think about Richard, about the house in Lexington, about the life I walked away from. I think about the guilt I still carry, the weight of the years I spent lying. I think about Sophie and Marcus, who are doing better now but still have bad days, who still look at their father with something complicated in their eyes. I think about Elaine, who has remarried a man who looks exactly like Daniel and who once told a mutual friend that she hoped we were happy, that she hoped we understood what we had taken from her. And then I think about this. About Daniel, sitting across from me in our coffee shop, looking at me the way he has always looked at me, like I'm a miracle, like I'm a mystery, like I'm the only thing in the world he wants to solve. Like I'm home. No, I say finally. It wasn't a mistake. It was the beginning. He smiles. It's the same smile I fell in love with, the same one I saw at the block party, the same one that has gotten me through every dark moment of the past 11 years. The beginning of what? Of everything, I say. Of us. Of the life we were supposed to have. He reaches across the table and takes my hand. His grip is warm, familiar, the same grip I have held 1,000 times. And I realized that this is what it all meant. All the years of hiding, all the pain of discovery, all the slow and difficult work of learning to love each other in the light instead of the shadows. It was all leading here. To this moment. To this coffee shop. To this man. I love you, he says. I know, I say. I love you too. I always have. Even when I shouldn't have. Even when I tried not to. Especially then, he says. That's when it counted most. I squeeze his hand. Outside, the first snow of the season is beginning to fall, tiny white flakes that drift past the window like thoughts from a dream. The coffee shop is warm and quiet, filled with the smell of burnt espresso and old paper. And for the first time in longer than I can remember, I feel at peace. Love quiet, forbidden midlife romance. Subscribe to Noah's Awakening for more slow burn stories. We were each other's only sexual partner for 2 years, pure, uncomplicated, nothing like the messy entanglement most affairs become. When we first started, there was a simplicity to it that surprised me. We didn't have to navigate the complications of previous partners, of comparing techniques, of wondering who else had touched this body before. It was just us. 2 people in a motel room, figuring it out together. And then we fell in love without meaning to. We fell in love and it destroyed 2 marriages and broke the hearts of people who trusted us and cost us years of guilt and grief. It cost Daniel his relationship with his son. It cost me my reputation in the neighborhood, my friendships with couples who couldn't understand how I could have done what I did. It cost us both the comfortable lives we had built, the people we had been, the easy excuses we could have made. But it also brought us here. To this booth, this coffee shop, this life we had built together in the full light of day. To a marriage that is real, that is chosen, that is fought for every single day. To the understanding that love is not just a feeling but a practice, a discipline, a daily decision to show up and be present and do the work. Some things are worth the destruction. Some things are worth the pain. Some things are worth fighting for, even when fighting means burning down everything you have built and starting again from the ashes. Daniel is worth it. This life we have made is worth it. And if I had to do it all again, the lying, the hiding, the years in the shadows, I would. In a heartbeat. Without hesitation. Because this is love. The real thing. The kind that doesn't care about timing or propriety or the rules that society imposes. The kind that finds you when you're not looking, that catches you when you're not ready, that holds you up even when you think you can't stand anymore. The kind that is worth everything. 星号 Love Quiet, Forbidden Midlife Romance. Subscribe to Noah's Awakening for more slow burn stories. 星号 11 years. 星号 that's how long it took. 11 years from the first time we kissed in that ugly motel room to the moment I understood what we had really been building all along. 星号 not an affair. Not a secret. Not a crime against the people we were supposed to love. 星号 a life. Our life. The only life either of us was ever meant to live. 星号 and if you're reading this, if you're somewhere in the shadows right now, hiding from a life that doesn't fit, pining for someone you can have, know this. 星号, it's not too late. It's never too late. Love doesn't care about timing or circumstance or the rules we think we have to follow. Love just cares about finding its way home. 星号 and sometimes, if you're lucky, if you're brave enough to reach for it, if you're willing to pay the price, it finds its way home to you. 星号 I know. It found its way home to me. 星号. 星号星号 the end. 星号星号. The first few months after that initial encounter in the motel room were a blur of discovery and terror in equal measure. We were like scientists who had stumbled upon a new element, fascinated by its properties, frightened of its instability, unsure whether it would prove to be a breakthrough or a bomb. We established patterns quickly, almost without discussion. The Elm Street coffee shop became our regular meeting place, neutral territory where we could sit for hours without raising suspicion. We were just two neighbors, after all. Two people from the same block, running into each other by coincidence. The baristas learned our orders, the same two drinks every time, like a ritual, and stopped looking at us strangely. But it was in the motel room that we truly lived. Room 12 at the Sunset Motor Lodge in Natick became our sanctuary, our church, our confessional. We went there at least twice a month, sometimes more when the pressure of our real lives became unbearable. We would check in separately, Daniel first, then me 10 minutes later. The clerk too disinterested to notice the pattern, and climbed the stairs to our private world. I remember one afternoon in February, about 4 months after our first time. We were lying in bed, tangled in the cheap sheets that smelled of industrial detergent and someone else's secrets, when Daniel said something that has stayed with me ever since. I feel like I'm living two lives, he said. The one everyone sees, husband, father, pharmaceutical salesman, and this one. The real one. The one where I'm actually alive. I propped myself up on one elbow to look at him. The winter light was coming through the cheap curtains in long gray bars, and his face was half in shadow, half illuminated. He looked younger in that moment, more vulnerable, like the boy he must have been before life taught him to armor himself. Doesn't everyone live two lives? I said. The public self and the private one. The face we show the world and the one we show ourselves. But most people's two lives don't feel this different from each other, he said. Most people can 整合 them, make them fit together somehow. Mine feel like they're from different planets. I understood what he meant. My life with Richard, the house in Lexington, the dinner conversations about nothing, the silence that had become our primary form of communication felt like it belonged to someone else. Some other Catherine. The good Catherine, the proper one, the one who did what was expected. And my life with Daniel felt like the truth, raw and unfiltered, the Catherine I had always been underneath the roles and responsibilities. Maybe that's how we know it's real, I said. If it felt easy, comfortable, like everything else, if it fit neatly into the boxes we were supposed to fit into, maybe it wouldn't matter as much. Daniel was quiet for a long time after that. Then he kissed me, slowly and deeply, and we made love again with a tenderness that made my chest ache. Love quiet, forbidden midlife romance. Subscribe to Noah's Awakening for more slow burn stories. Here's something they don't tell you about affairs. They change you. Not just the obvious ways, the guilt, the deception, the constant awareness of living a lie, but in deeper ways. Ways that rearrange your fundamental understanding of who you are. Before Daniel, I had been a person with clear boundaries. I was loyal, mostly. I believed in the sanctity of marriage, the importance of fidelity, the idea that boss meant something. I would have been horrified, genuinely horrified, if someone had told me I would someday be a woman who cheated on her husband, who lied to his face, who built a secret life with another man and called it love. And then I was that woman. And I discovered that the woman I had been, the loyal Catherine, the good wife, the woman with principles, was not the whole picture. She was a version, a draft, a first attempt at a person that had turned out to be missing something essential. Daniel gave me permission to be that missing thing. He gave me permission to want more than stability, to need more than companionship, to refuse the quiet diminishment that comes from settling for a life that doesn't fit. And that gift, terrifying as it was, changed me irrevocably. I started noticing other things too. The way our bodies communicated things our words couldn't. The way he knew, without me saying anything, when I was sad or stressed or struggling. The way I could read his moods from the set of his shoulders, the tension in his jaw, the particular sigh he made when he was trying not to feel something. We developed a private language, Daniel and I, a vocabulary of glances and gestures and inside jokes that belonged to no one else. We could be in a room full of people, our spouses, our neighbors, the barista at the coffee shop, and communicate an entire conversation through the way we looked at each other. It was like being in a play where we were the only actors who knew the script, surrounded by extras who had no idea they were part of something larger. But it was lonely too. The most intimate loneliness I have ever experienced. To be so deeply known by another person, and yet unable to share that knowledge with anyone. To carry this tremendous thing inside me, this love, this secret, this entire other life, and have it be invisible to everyone except the one person I couldn't show it to in public. That was the cruelest part, I think. The invisibility. The way an affair makes you both hyper-visible to your lover and completely invisible to everyone else. Daniel saw me, truly saw me in a way that no one else had ever seen me. And yet I couldn't show him to anyone. Couldn't point to him and say, Xinghao, this is the person I love. This is the person who makes me feel alive. Xinghao, he existed only in the shadows, only in the stolen hours we carved out of our impossible lives. Love quiet, forbidden midlife romance. Subscribe to Noah's Awakening for more slow burn stories. People often ask me what those years were like, the years between the beginning of our affair and the end of our marriages. They imagine it was all passion, all intensity, all the wild excitement of two people doing something forbidden. But it wasn't like that. Not at all. The truth is, most of our time together was remarkably ordinary. We talked about our days. We complained about our jobs. We discussed books and movies and the latest political scandal. We ate takeout in motel rooms and took walks in the conservation land and sat in the coffee shop for hours reading separate sections of the newspaper. We thought about stupid things: who was late, who had forgotten something, who had said something careless that wounded the other. We made up with a tenderness that made the fighting seem worthwhile. Here is a catalog of small moments, the kind that don't make it into stories but that I remember most vividly all these years later. The time Daniel brought me chamomile tea when I had a headache, just because he remembered I liked it from that first conversation at the block party. The time I found one of his novels, the abandoned manuscript, in his car and read the first chapter before he noticed, and cried at the beauty of his prose and the sadness of his sentences. The time we got caught in a thunderstorm on our walk and ended up hiding under a picnic shelter, soaked to the bone, laughing so hard we couldn't breathe. The time he told me about the summer he spent backpacking through Europe after college, sleeping in hostels and train stations and once in a field of wildflowers in Tuscany, and I fell in love with him all over again because of the person he had been before the world made him cautious. The time I told him about my mother, the real story, not the sanitized version I told everyone else, and he held me while I cried and said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. The time we spent an entire Sunday afternoon in bed, not having sex, just talking about our childhoods and our regrets and our secret hopes. And at the end of it I felt closer to him than I had ever felt to anyone. The time he showed me a photograph of himself at 22, thin and intense and full of belief, and I understood for the first time what he had sacrificed to become the person he was. These are the moments that build us. Not the dramatic ones, the confessions, the confrontations, the high-stakes decisions, but the small ones. The ordinary ones. The ones that happen in the spaces between the extraordinary. Love Quiet, Forbidden Midlife Romance. Subscribe to Noah's Awakening for more slow burn stories. I think about Richard often, still. Not with longing that wound closed years ago, but with a kind of persistent ache, like a scar that hurts when the weather changes. He deserved better than what I gave him. That is the simple truth of it. He married a woman who thought she wanted what he offered: a stable life, a comfortable home, a partnership based on mutual respect and shared values, and then discovered, years later, that she wanted something else entirely. Something he couldn't provide because he didn't know it existed. I wonder sometimes what our life would have been like if I had never met Daniel. If the block party had gone differently, if Daniel and Elaine had moved to a different neighborhood, if any of the thousand small coincidences that brought us together had failed to align. Would I have stayed with Richard forever? Would I have eventually found contentment in our quiet life together? Would I have learned to want less, to need less, to accept what was offered? I don't know. I will never know. That's the thing about the choices we make. They foreclose on all the other choices we might have made, and we can never go back to find out. Richard moved on eventually, as people do. A year after our separation, he started dating a woman named Margaret, a radiologist at his hospital, a widow with 2 teenage daughters. I met her once, at a neighborhood event, and we talked for 20 minutes about nothing in particular. She was kind, warm, the kind of woman who laughed easily and remembered your name and asked about your life as if she actually wanted to know. She was also nothing like me. Where I had been guarded, careful, always holding part of myself back, Margaret seemed to be all the way present. All the way there. I remember thinking, good for Richard. He deserves someone who can give him everything. I told Daniel about meeting Margaret, and he held my hand across the table and said, "You're not jealous?" "No," I said, and meant it. "I'm relieved." He studied my face for a long moment, looking for signs of the lie I wasn't telling. Then he nodded and squeezed my hand, and we went back to our coffee, our conversation, our lives. That was another thing about us, in those years. We could talk about the people we were hurting, the spouses we were betraying, the families we were destroying without either of us breaking down or walking away. We had learned to hold the unbearable together, to sit with the knowledge of what we were doing without being paralyzed by it. It was a survival mechanism, I think. A way of continuing forward when every ethical instinct told us we should stop. Love Quiet, Forbidden Midlife Romance. Subscribe to Noah's Awakening for more slow burn stories. Year 8 was the hardest year of our lives. Everything that could go wrong did. Daniel's company went through a restructuring, and he was laid off along with a third of the sales force. For 6 months, he sent out resumes and went to interviews and watched the unemployment check dwindle while Elaine grew more anxious and the bills piled up. The worst part was watching him diminish, the way he carried himself differently when he didn't have a job to define him, The way he started to believe the story his father had always told him about writers being impractical, about dreamers never amount to anything. I wanted to help. I wanted to give him money, to tell Elaine it was coming from somewhere else, to solve the problem the way I solved everything back then, quietly, secretly, from the shadows. But Daniel wouldn't hear of it. If you give me money, we're no different from every other cliché about affairs, he said. Sugar daddy and his cat woman. I'm not doing that. So I helped in other ways. I brought groceries to their house, told Elaine they were from a neighbor who had overbought. I watched Sophie and Marcus so Daniel and Elaine could have a night out without the kids, giving them space to work on a marriage I was simultaneously destroying. I did everything I could, within the narrow constraints of our situation, to ease the burden he was carrying. And then, just as Daniel found a new job, a consulting position, less money but more flexible hours, Sophie found out about us. She was 18 by then, a freshman at Boston College, home for fall break. She had come back to Wellesley to see her mother and pick up some clothes she had left behind. And she had found us. We were at the coffee shop, Daniel and I. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the place nearly empty, and we had let our guard down. We were holding hands across the table. We were looking at each other with the softness that had developed between us over 8 years of loving each other. And Sophie walked in. I will never forget the look on her face. The recognition. The betrayal. The way her eyes went from Daniel to me to our joined hands and back to Daniel, putting together the pieces of a puzzle she had probably been assembling for years. Dad, she said. Just that. Just his title, his role, his claim on her confusion. Daniel let go of my hand like it was on fire. Sophie, is this true? She was looking at me now, and there was such hatred in her eyes that I felt it physically, like a blow to the chest. Is this the woman you've been having an affair with all these years? I don't remember what I said. I don't remember what either of us said. I remember Sophie's face crumpling, and then her running out of the coffee shop, and Daniel after her, calling her name. I remember sitting alone in the booth with my coffee going cold and my heart pounding, and the certain knowledge that we had reached a point of no return. That was the beginning of the end of Daniel's relationship with his daughter. Not the affair itself that she had suspected, maybe. But this, the discovery, the confirmation. The moment when the abstract became concrete and she had to confront the reality of what her father had done. It took her 2 years to speak to him again. 2 years of silence, of return letters, of holidays spent apart. 2 years of Daniel carrying that wound like a stone in his chest, getting heavier and heavier as the months passed. And all I could do was watch. All I could do was love him through it, hold him when he cried, tell him it would get better even when I wasn't sure it would. I had created this wound. I had to witness its healing, or lack of healing, for as long as it took. Love quiet, forbidden midlife romance. Subscribe to Noah's Awakening for more slow burn stories. I am not going to tell you that everything worked out perfectly, because it didn't. It never does. Marcus still doesn't speak to his father. At 23 now, he has built a life in California that doesn't include Daniel, and the few times they have been in the same room, the silence has been so thick you could cut it with a knife. Daniel has learned to accept this, or at least to fake acceptance convincingly, but I see the way it hurts him. I see the way his eyes go to his phone sometimes, hoping for a text that doesn't come. Elaine remarried a man who looks remarkably like Daniel, same height, same build, same whiskey brown eyes, and if that's not a form of haunting, I don't not know what is. She seems happy, or at least content, which is more than I could have hoped for given what we did to her. Richard is still with Margaret, still a cardiologist, still the kind of man who remembers birthdays and calls to check on people when they're sick. They seem well matched, the two of them. Grounded. Comfortable in a way Daniel and I will never be, because our foundation was built on earthquake fault lines. And me? I am here. With Daniel. In a house in Arlington that is smaller than the one I shared with Richard but feels more like home. I am writing again, finally not the secret novel I used to draft in my notebooks, but something new. Something about this. About us. About the impossible thing we built from the wreckage of our choices. I am 49 years old. Daniel is 51. We have been together, really together, out in the open, no more hiding for 3 years now. And I can tell you that it is worth it. All of it. The years of guilt, the months of loneliness, the conversations we couldn't have in public, the love we couldn't share with anyone who would understand. It was worth it. I used to wonder if I would feel guilty forever, if the weight of what I did would follow me to my grave, if I would die still carrying the memory of the harm I caused. And the answer is, yes, I do carry it. But the weight has changed over time. It started as shame, the crushing, immobilizing shame of someone who has done something unforgivable. And it has transformed into something else. Something I can hold without being crushed by it. Guilt is not a fixed state. It is a process. It is something you learn to live with, to make peace with, to integrate into the person you are becoming. I am not the woman who cheated on Richard. I am the woman who learned from that cheating, who grew into someone better because of it, who found her way to the love she was always looking for. That doesn't make the cheating okay. Nothing makes it okay. But it makes it survivable. It makes it part of a larger story, a story that has an ending I can live with. I am sitting in the coffee shop, just like I was at the beginning. The espresso machine is still broken. The Xinhao New Yorker Xinhao stack is still there, though the issues are different now, more recent. The corner booth has new leather, or at least it looks new, though I suspect it's the same worn material just recovered. Everything looks the same and nothing is the same. Daniel is across from me, reading something on his phone, and every few minutes he looks up and catches my eye and smiles. It is a small smile, the smile of a man who has found what he was looking for and knows it. I smile back. And for a moment we exist in a bubble of private understanding, two people who have been through hell together and come out the other side. Here is what I want you to understand, if you have read this far. Love is not clean. It is not simple. It does not arrive at convenient times or in convenient packages. It does not ask your permission before it changes your life. It does not wait until you are ready. I was not ready. I was married to a good man, living a comfortable life, doing everything I was supposed to do. And then Daniel was there, this person who saw me, who understood me, who made me feel alive in a way I had forgotten was possible, and nothing I had been taught about fidelity and marriage and being a good person was enough to stop what happened next. Does that excuse what I did? No. Nothing excuses it. I had people I loved, people who trusted me, people who deserved better. I made choices that I will be atoning for the rest of my life. But I also found something. Something real. Something that made the distraction worthwhile, in the end. I found Daniel. I found myself. I found the life I was always supposed to live, even if I had to burn down my old one to get to it. I don't know if that's a lesson you should take away from this. I don't know if it's a story that should give you hope or make you afraid. All I know is that it is true. It happened. And if I had to choose again, I would make the same choice. Every time. Without hesitation. Because this is what love does. It finds you. It claims you. It remakes you in its image, whether you want to be remade or not. And if you're lucky, if you're brave enough to let it, it will bring you to the other side. To the coffee shop. To the corner booth. To the man who has loved you since the fireflies at the block party, and who will love you until the day he dies. That is enough. That has to be enough. It is more than enough.